First of all, I want to welcome a couple of the members that it's their first opportunity to attend one of our meetings. So for Jay, welcome. Jay Gazelski, welcome, and Brian Hall, whose travel schedule previously didn't allow him to attend. So we're happy to have them here and have their participation. I want to go ahead and I think we're going to be pretty focused on where we're arriving. We are running up against a June deadline to submit to County Council our first economic development plan. Although I'd say, I don't know that we've used this term before, but I do think it's going to be a living document that we'll continue to make amendments to. But we do have a fairly terse or compact economic development plan, which I think we can make some additions to. I don't know if quantity is equivalent to quality, because I think the quality here is good. But at this point, I will turn it over to Larry Benders to go through the. Well, before I get to that, is there any other matters that you want to bring up that are not on the agenda? Because that's basically the only item we have for our agenda today. Is there anything else preliminarily? I don't think we had minutes or anything that we need to approve or anything of that nature. So, hearing nothing else from other board members, Larry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Larry Benders, Director of Development for the county. Third week on the job. I sent to you all electronically, or your delegates over the weekend or Monday at the latest, the 50-page plan or so. It's a living document, as I had said earlier, but it's the full detailed plan. I also included, at the suggestion of Mr. Strawn, a 3-page executive summary where I tried to condense the key elements of the plan down into a 3-page document. And that copy that is in front of you. And I further condensed that into a 1-page summary to try to really get the key points, and that is in front of you as well. And then, for the conversation today, I've turned it into a PowerPoint, which is the same information as on the 1-page document. Slides 2 up per page to help you follow along with the key points. My plan today is to take you through the 1-page summary, which is the mission, vision, drivers, and metrics and key next steps we need to do. So if that's okay, acceptable, we'll just forward to it. Thoughts, questions, comments? Great.
Can you hear it all?
Yes.
Larry? Yes. Yep, one yes, one no.
Right there.
So Jay, you can't hear me?
It's hard.
That's fine. All right, I'll try to.
There was a handheld mic someplace, remember?
I'd also just invite you to come forward. I mean, there's seats up here. We don't have to worry about if you have an official right to be at these tables.
If I speak this way, that'll probably be helpful. Is that helpful for you folks? Okay, good. All right, the first slide is vision. As you've seen in prior drafts, the vision in the plan is through innovation, education, strategic investments, and collaboration, this county is a place which offers opportunities for businesses to prosper and for residents to have meaningful, gainful employment and to live healthy lives. The vision. We've seen this before. Mr. Roman, at a prior meeting, had said that perhaps we shouldn't place too much stock in visions, and I understand that. So I'll turn next to the next page, which is the mission. And this is the work we need to do. The work is to improve the county's global competitiveness through economic growth and ensure that Cuyahoga County is a vibrant, healthy, and welcoming place. That is the mission. That's the job we need to do every day. Now, to do that, this summer, hundreds of volunteers gathered in teams throughout the county called transition teams to help the new government understand what needed to be done. Along the way, we heard from the Brookings people in Washington. The Brookings people in Washington who are well known for understanding how urban communities need to work. And what Bruce Katz and his Brookings team came up with were drivers of economic growth. And this is the Venn diagram you see in the bottom of that page. The drivers in our plan, there are 2, human capital and quality place. What Brookings says is if you invest in high quality, well-connected places for residents and businesses, so that's the place. And then if you ensure access to and preparation for jobs and careers today and tomorrow for the workforce, you invest in those 2 things, quality place, human capital, you get economic activity, you get growth. And that's what we need to do. So you get the whole 50 pages of the plan is talking about how you invest in quality places and human capital. Human capital, think workforce, think education as well. Then, next slide. The third point is you've got to create this culture of innovation. You've got to allow for news. You've got to accelerate business growth by connecting existing, this is an important theme that I think is perhaps understated in the plan, existing companies and new companies to regional resources that will help them invent, commercialize, make, and sell new products to growing global markets. So you've got to have the innovation. So you invest in people, invest in place, create the conditions for innovation, and you can be successful. Then the plan, next slide, key metrics. In the plan, as you saw, there are probably 30 different measures of success. And we focused on these first 5 or 6 on this slide, of all the ones that were submitted to us. The first and most important is jobs. And the plan talks about job creation and job retention. So that's the first thing we're going to measure. We need to measure that frequently. The second is the quality of our workforce, skill level of workforce. And at Employment Connection, through the Workforce Investment Act, we can measure job placement activity. That's one. We can also measure successful training. So are there vacancies in jobs that need skilled workers that need to be trained? We can measure our ability to train those workers to take those jobs. We'll also measure sales tax receipts as a measure of economic vitality, not just retail sales, but sales spending activity in our market. We'll measure exports, as you see in the plan. Productivity, and as Mayor Jackson is prone to point out to me over the last several years, productivity is an interesting measure these days as companies continue to try to shed their costs to improve their profitability. But they need to be profitable in order to stay and to grow. So we need to help create conditions for companies to improve their productivity. And then finally, for the first key measures, is property. Property meaning, are we county properties and all properties in the county, county-owned and others, are they at their highest and best use? And if they aren't, what do we need to do to get them to their highest and best use? Do we have a land assembly program? Are we able to say to Tom Altemeyer and his team, we can put together a 30-acre parcel on a rail siding with a warehouse with 30-foot ceilings, we can do all those things, and we're ready to go today, or it's going to take X million dollars to remediate and make it available. We don't have the capacity to do that today. We need to be able to do that to make sure we have quality places for companies to locate and to stay in our county. So those are the key measures that the plan that you've seen outlines. So with that, talk about the actions, the key activities we have to take immediately, day one. Key action slide. We've got to improve the intra-county government coordination and collaboration and determine the best role the county can play in each of these activities. The county is engaged in innumerable activities, and some are overlapping and sometimes conflicting. For instance, in my Department of Development, we have a nationally recognized lead abatement program. But that's also a public health kind of issue, which is a different county department. We need to be able to work better and more intentionally with both of those departments inter-county to make sure we're spending effectively, getting the outcomes that we need. We also can look at the activities that the training teams identified throughout the county as needing better coordination. There are a long list of them. We have a housing agency within a homelessness department within the Department of Development, and also a homeless department at the county. These are issues that are duplicative that we can get rid of and make much more efficient and effective.
So Larry, when you say that, improve inter-county government coordination collaboration, and you just gave us 2 or 3 examples, would the plan then talk about the actual steps to improve those things, or the fact that we were going to evaluate how to improve those things?
The latter, Brian. The plan is very heavy on first tier, certainly, organizing and understanding, determining what the issues really are, and then we have the implementation steps together. We don't have implementation steps for many of these. We're just identifying them now. We've been at this for 90 days, but you're right. That's what we need to do is say, how are we going to implement these programs? First step today, in this period, is to say, this is what's important to us. These are the things, this is the target, this is what we're going to go after. Here are the key things we're going to measure. Now we can go and put the work into place to make sure we can get the outcome we want.
Well, I would just hope that we quickly get to key actions being tied to those metrics that you talked about on the previous page, because these are all things that we would do to understand what we need to do to get to those metrics. But we've got to move quickly to say these are the things that we can do to move those metrics.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
And that's a plan.
Yes, you're right. That's right. The the second key action we need to take is determine how the county can best contribute to the success of this myriad of economic development players we have in the region. I think Team NEO, Jumpstart, GCP, lots of entities that the county has been, in many cases, passive. We need to figure out how we're going to best align, fund, contribute to, encourage this network of economic development players to be successful, to realize our mission and our vision. And absent that, they're going to continue to do the work they can in their vacuums and not in a coordinated fashion. We have the ability to bring them together to make sure that we can realize our mission and our objectives. The third point is to create the $100 million economic development plan that the executives talked about, and basically then to invest strategically those funds. One issue we have in the Department of Development right now is we have about $6 million to $9 million of general fund money that levers about $90 million of federal kinds of money, whether it's NSP money, block grant money, and the rest. So what we have is we have very few resources of our own to invest to meet our own objectives, and significantly more resources of someone else's and their objectives, block grant money, for instance, or home stabilization, neighborhood stabilization. We don't have the ability to say, we want to affect this particular outcome on this street because we don't have our own resources. We need to be able to do that. Hence, the Economic Development Fund, so that we can decide what's important to us, how we can invest our money, and then lever the existing federal monies that are out there, which we need to do, and then invest in strategically. Next point is to evaluate the existing county programs. This is largely in the Department of Development, which we have many. We have loan programs, we have grant programs, and their funding streams, which are often federal, and brownfield programs, for instance, to determine their application and their value. If things are working very well and they have great value, we should do more of them. If they're not working, we should stop doing them. We shouldn't be doing things just because we have money to do them. We should do things that further our mission. Establish a land assembly program is the next one. Mayor Akers arranged a meeting on my first day 3 weeks ago with about 50 mayors and directors of economic development around the county. And one of the things we heard loud and clear was this concept of land assembly and the need to have an inventory and understand how we can put parcels together, whether it's ours or someone else's parcels, put together so that companies can grow, expand, and relocate here to the county. And that's back to Mr. Hall's point earlier, that's getting the existing resources of the county together. There's a land bank, there's a planning commission, there's a Department of Development that need to work more intentionally together to come up with a plan and figure out how we can do all that. The resources are here, we just have to align them. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Testing. Thank you. And the final one is to organize the Department of Development to support the mission and the vision of the plan. Right now, we don't have a Department of Development that is organized to do these things. What we have now is about 60 people, well-intended, good county employees that are organized as a housing department. We run an airport, and we have a relatively few people arranged around economic development loans and grants. We need to organize the department to make sure that we can put the plans together right, the action plans to make sure that we can realize these particular key activities right away. So that's the last key action that we have, that we've highlighted from the plan. Again, the plan has 30 of these items, and we just highlighted a few of them today. So that's a quick summary of where the Economic Development Plan is today.
Larry, in regards to the third bullet, as far as the $100 million Economic Development Fund, is it that we need to have the $100 million, or do we need to have the impact of $100 million that we can actually direct if we are able? I understand the federal funds maybe have some controls and things that have some leverage on it, but if we are able to amass that through other techniques, SBA or some other way of doing a multiplier effect, is that going to critically determine our success or not of being able to drive economic development in the county?
Yes, having our own framework and strategy is essential, and then having the financing to put into place is the next part to make it possible. It's necessary to have the plan, but not sufficient. Resources make it sufficient, and $100 million is a really good start to say, here's what's important to us, here's what we want to get done, and we have the resources to do it. Then, what other leverage can we bring to play, other federal monies, to apply to our particular mission and objectives, the tactics that we wish to put into place?
Have you estimated how much that $100 million could be leveraged? In other words, how much that would buy in terms of resource capability or capacity?
The question was, have we estimated how much we can really do with the $100 million, how much we can lever? no, we haven't done that work yet, but we would say that it's a start. It's certainly a start to help us begin to affect the plans that we want to put in place.
Let me, if I could, I want to answer kind of both, or make some comments to both of those questions. First of all, why land on $100 million as opposed to of new funding, as opposed to trying to assemble what we're already doing? It has its own value in setting an ambitious goal of $100 million of new funding that doesn't exist before. It doesn't mean that the county's sole contribution is going to be $100 million. It could be, and it hopefully will be, a heck of a lot more than that. But we intentionally have been talking about $100 million in new funding, as opposed to, now, I can tell you originally, we had discussed some plans about saying, well, because that was a number that had been thrown around in the transition and in various campaigns and so forth. There was talk early on, because we were under so much financial pressure, that we might be able to argue that we already do $100 million. In a $1.4 billion budget, and that includes state and federal pass-throughs, but in a $1.4 billion budget, you could argue that you're having a $1.4 billion impact already. So there could be ways that we could have finessed that and said, well, if you count everything we do with CDBG, and you count everything we do with workforce development, and you count everything we do with Brownfield program, and start adding that all up, you could say, well, we already do $100 million, and we're just going to coordinate it a little bit better. But the decision that we eventually landed on was that we wanted to make a significant commitment for actually new resources. Now, there's a couple things have already happened as a result of that. One thing is that the fact that we publicly announced we were going to do that, and that has sent a very powerful signal. So we've already, as Larry knows, we've already had some discussions with some folks from the private sector that want to not entirely match with another $100 million, but there are going to be matching investments that we've already gotten some tentative commitments from the private sector, because the fact that we were willing to say we're going to put $100 million brand new into the system has inspired some confidence with some folks that have some capacity to invest on the private sector. That was an important thing to do. Secondly, in terms of what it will leverage, I mean, I want to be clear what, go into maybe a little bit more detail than you want, but that's the most concrete thing that's going to be done in the short term in order to realize these goals. I think there'll be other things that will eventually be as significant or more important. If we waited until we could get $100 million out of the county budget, that would be a long process. Or if we had waited, let's say, for casino revenues to come about and then dedicate those or bond those out, that would have been a long process. Once all of that uncertainty around the casino revenues was resolved. So what we ended up doing was we said that we knew that in the short term we could at least end up we had the bonding capacity, and I felt like we could get to a point financially where we could pay the service on a $100 million bond. That ends up being about $8 million a year. I can tell you we've already saved $10 million in payroll this year. So we can get there. That's through the reduction of about 150 employees through either layoff, termination, or attrition. So we're already there, I think, in terms of financial capacity of paying that off. Now we have a lot of other cuts that we have to absorb from the state and the feds and so forth. So in terms of leveraging it in terms of, you know, if we had $100 million in cash, there'd be other ways that we could take out of the system short term. We could leverage all kinds of additional bonding capacity to do that. But I just want to be clear that that's where that $100 million is coming from. Now, whether or not that ends up leading towards leveraging in a less traditional financial way, but leveraging or encouraging other entities, either private or public, to contribute to that, we've kind of taken the first leap on that. We're going to have to see if anybody joins us with that. We've had some indications that that's going to happen, but that's going to remain to be seen, I think.
Thoughts on the executive summary of the full plan that you've seen?
Mr. Chairman, may I offer a suggestion? First of all, I think this is an excellent plan. My compliments to you for what you come up with. And also, you made reference to the meeting we had with the mayors and the economic development directors. Let me say, and I want to tell you, Mr. Chairman, that was an excellent meeting. Went 2 hours, full 2 hours, and a lot of good feedback come back. And the feedback I had since then, we deeply appreciate your coming out, and the mayors appreciated being heard on that. And there were several references in your plan to what came out of the meeting, which we appreciate that. I would like to ask respectfully, one additional suggestion. I would like to urge that we consider a paragraph or two proactively saying that the county will take the lead through this plan. And for the sake of a better word, I'm going to use removing barriers or red tape, whatnot, so that the 57 municipalities, as they seek to do business in this county, or as businesses seek to do business in those communities, that we somehow try to work towards removing reducing, shall I say, the variety of disparities in codes and regulations and forms and permits and fees and inspections. It discourages businesses from going from one community to another or expanding even in those communities. From my experience in marketing and banking, we always said, oh, you're spending a lot of advertising dollars, how do we get new customers in? Some of your best source of new business are your present customers, getting them to take additional services. So we have these companies that are here, whether they be contractors, developers, healthcare companies or hospitals, whatever it may be, as far as moving in there. If we could set up some type of almost like a one-stop shop where those companies, those individuals could come to this place in the county. What are the requirements to going into the Solon or a Strongsville or fill in the name of community, so they don't have to go to 57 different communities. Sort of centralize the help or the work of developers in learning what has to be done and what they need in the various communities. What is it that's delaying or inhibiting business growth in the various communities, and what can the county do to remove those barriers or simplify? If we could get to the work, hopefully, where we can encourage more and more of the communities to sort of standardize some of those fees and regulations and paperwork and whatnot, I think this would enhance the business situation considerably within the county. I think then the county is the logical entity to serve that role. I heard something where there's something called we know it's software, something called middleware, which I learned was where businesses go to and learn all this. And then we can encourage more and more communities to join in on this and working together. And I think you got a sense in that meeting with the mayors that there's and economic development directors, there is a growing climate, I think, for that kind of cooperation, if you will, coordination. And I would respectfully ask that there be some paragraph or two in this plan. It's an excellent plan, doing a great job, but to make a little more proactive statement on the part of the county in that direction.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
Mayor and Ed, I thank you. Excellent suggestion. We'll do so. I hear two things in what you're saying. One is the concept of one-stop shop, which is kind of a tactic, a thing to put in place, which makes sense. And I think the county is positioned to play that role of convening, getting people together, and helping them, getting to encourage cooperation and standardization across borders. The other thing you said was about the cost in business. It's much cheaper to maintain an existing customer than to acquire a new one. And one thing we have to be very careful of in economic development plans is being seduced by the next big thing. And we have to be very mindful of who is here today, the companies that are here today, paying the bills, making the difference for us. We have to make sure that they want to stay, and that we're doing everything we can first to help them expand and grow their businesses. So that's a point well taken, and we'll make sure that we're reflecting that in the plan.
Bruce, a couple things I could add to that. One is we have talked about different ways to do that in a couple different ways. One is what should the concept I agree with entirely. How we're going to do it, whether that's done by the county directly, whether it's done through a nonprofit that's kind of a clearinghouse, I don't know, and I wouldn't be wedded to any particular methodology about how it should happen, but it definitely should happen. Part of it, I think, is legal, because I think it has to do with adopting model codes and trying to get cities to adopt model codes of whether it be zoning or building, permitting processes, and so forth. We had an interesting meeting. We had some of our staff go down to Summit County and have Larry among them, and our chief of staff and some other folks that we had down there. Summit County does it better. We don't have to go that far for some of the examples of this. Summit County does a better job in terms of consolidating building department functions. And there will be communities that won't want to do that for whatever reason, but there will also, especially with all the budgetary pressure, there will be plenty that, I think there'll be plenty of interest in it. There's also a tech side of that, and we have started to talk. We've got some proposals from a couple vendors who elsewhere in the United States have done basically there's a tech component to this where there's one program that cities can buy into, and it's a web portal to do these things. And that's also there's an aspect to that as well.
And there's also another theme here, which is back to the role of the county. And as long as we have a mission, if we keep focused on delivering the mission, we don't have to do everything. We just need to make sure that it gets done. And that's an important distinction, and making sure we're playing the right role to encourage, whether it's a not-for-profit to do this or someone else does it. We just need it done. We don't have to do it ourselves. It just needs to be done.
Larry, one of the things that doesn't seem to be coming through to me is that other groups of economic development are looking at some sectors. And I know we want to be careful not to pick winners and losers, but by the same token, to at least acknowledge that the state is focusing on sectors. They're going to put a lot of resources behind those sectors. And within our own community, we know that clearly what we can hear the equipment going on. One of the sectors that we've already committed to here in the region is the medical and the whole medical community. And do we want to make a statement, at least saying that medical and advanced manufacturing and some of these things that the state has already identified are going to be on our sector list also?
Yes, yes, two things. Yeah, sectors are actually called clusters in the plan, so they are referred to. They have not made it to the summary today, but absolutely it is there, and it's an important aspect of organizing. But how do you think about commerce? How do you think about business in sectors or in clusters? That's the language of the plan. But you're right, it's there.
First of all, I'm glad our colleague Bruce waited until your first day to bring you in front of the county mayors and managers. Didn't bring you in even before you started. I mean, I'm surprised you waited so long, Mayor. A couple of just random observations. I do think this is well on its way, and we've sort of touched on it. Maybe we could be a little bit clearer in the plan. We don't have to outline them today, but what things we see as outsourcing opportunities to somebody that's already involved in it, to what things really need to be insourced. And by that I mean the county's the only one that can do it. And maybe starting to get our heads around that. A second one would be, and I think Bruce mentioned this too, and you did too in terms of your not to be seduced. Everywhere and everybody is somewhat guilty of this. In our economic development planning, we tend, when we look at the dollar we have to spend, to think about spending way more of it on attraction than on the people we've already got in our particular localities and how they can expand as opposed to simply thinking about attractions. I think if we could give that a little bit more emphasis. 3, and it doesn't, maybe it's not right, because I do think county executive's right, this is going to be a moving document. It has to be. All of them should be, but we're in a particular unique case since this is a brand new kind of government. So to expect that this be a document that's already ripe for 5-year implementation doesn't make sense. But somewhere thinking about an infrastructure plan for the county that ties to economic development, I think would be a good additional suggestion. A 4th idea or recommendation would be the metrics are right for a 3 to 5 year plan, but maybe we could think about 1 or 2 metrics for the first year, and maybe that's just getting this $100 million fund created, which would be a big win. But right now, as we state these metrics, other than sales tax receipts, which should begin to climb as the economy gets a little stronger, most of these things really are 3 to 5 year influencer kind of things. And then lastly, I think we should be, maybe this is where all of us can help. I think we should develop an advocacy plan for the county. By that I mean, what do we want the state and the federal government to be doing for us or stop doing to us? And I think that can influence an office. It's sort of in between the lines, but I think we have a unique ability as this county to, with all of the assets that we have, to influence outside policy more than we do. And maybe to just start keeping a list of those things and developing how they're consistent with this plan, I think would be I know we'd be willing to help, and I think everybody here would be willing to help. So just some ideas.
Where do you see inclusion in this, or do you believe it to be of any significance in terms of economic development and in terms of business opportunity and wealth creation? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Where do I see inclusion in this, and
Yes.
is it important? It is essential. It is articulated in several places. In action items, it talks about ensuring that the plan works with entities that fund minority startups, and they've mentioned some of those in the plan. It talks early on at the bottom of the second page or so of the plan. It says, like the final point. The final point is it's essential that I'll read the language. This is just before the mission statement in the body of the plan itself. Finally, and of utmost importance, a plan for the region and for this county particularly must fully embrace the diversity of our region in the broadest sense. We must aspire to economic growth and quality of place that fosters inclusion and addresses disparities at every step. I believe, Mayor, that we don't want to relegate inclusion to a program. It needs to be part of what we do.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
And
Sir.
I'm just trying to see, other than making the statement, we have an action plan, how do we ensure that happens? Because it's a great statement, but what does it, where is the guarantee of an outcome? It's not in the vision, nor in the mission.
No, but it's in the metrics and the drivers. If you could turn back to the Venn diagram, which is on the PowerPoint, the second slide.
Second slide.
Sorry,
Yeah, I saw it there,
Yeah,
and I
that's-
looked for it in here.
Right.
When you went to human capital, I looked
Right.
for it in here. I didn't see it there.
It's one of the measures of human capital. One of the places you need to invest is in education attainment, racial inclusion, income inequality. It's on the graphic. I neglected to say it, but you're right. It's essential and it's measurable.
How about adding it to a metric, though? I mean, the metrics, it's not really in the metrics.
Okay, understand.
Well, I think it's a good point, because I always like to try to imagine how would things fail, and if we're gonna say why did this fail? If we said 10 years from now we look back on this and said there was this effort to have a plan and it didn't work, what would be the things that we would predict that would make it a failure? Well, one of the things would be that we had a lot of rhetorical aspirations in it, but there wasn't enough follow-up, there weren't enough action items, there weren't enough things to measure on a frequent basis to say, here's where you said you were going to go, and here are the mile markers you were supposed to hit, and you didn't hit them. The other thing, though, is that I think we have to recognize what the history of the city of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County has been on big projects and large investments of taxpayer dollars. And it is a great history in terms of getting either inclusion or having the economic benefit really filter down to to neighborhoods and excluded groups from benefiting the way that they were designed. But so I think it's appropriate to put it beginning, middle, and end and have it as a theme throughout anywhere that it is. But I can tell you, there are some things that are happening that I've just noticed in the last couple of years where I think that this area is really getting it. If you look at what for example, did in terms of commitments that they made to local spend and SBE and MBE, they're emerging as a national model, and they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to do it. They just did it. I'm not saying it didn't create goodwill for them to do it. There weren't rational reasons to do it, but they didn't have to do it, but they did it. And what you're seeing now, those goals existed a long time ago, but repeatedly projects would fall short on it. That is trickling down in all kinds of projects. I'll give you another quick example. I went out to ribbon cutting in Warrensville Heights earlier, and they have a very exciting project that they have going on there that is a combination. It's a partnership between the city of Warrensville Heights, the county library system, and the YMCA. They set a goal, I think, of 32% in terms of local contractors and MBE and SBE and local spend. And they're at about 36–37% so far. And so those best practices that are working they're out there. And I think there'd be a way not just to have it as a theme throughout the document, but also, to me, if the document's missing anything, and I think that's part of the reason to have a meeting here today as opposed to just ask people to approve it, is in the period between now and when we finally adopt it, what are the very specific things? What projects do we look at, and how do we measure it, and so that it's not rhetorical? Because if we don't do that the right way, first of all, if we don't articulate it the right way, there's going to be skepticism from large portions of the public that this is an elitist document, and it is not, and that is why the commission is made up of the individuals that it is. But secondly, what really inspires confidence, or what gains confidence, is having a performance measure that is met.
So this whole...
Mayor, go ahead.
And if I may add.
Sure.
And you're right, Mr. Fitzgerald. UH is an agreement that we've reached with them. It's the first time I ever had an owner of a major project that was not obligated to do anything because of laws. That it was a private sector venture that had no obligation to follow the city of Cleveland's law whatsoever, but there was a willingness and a recognition of the need to ensure that that the right thing happened, and that it was a benefit because it created the wealth and spin-off benefits that you would have, and not just with minority companies or females, but with just local companies. And so that's what I'm speaking of here. And so it's not just those over which we have control, then you just, the law applies. But if it's not part of what we do naturally when we do business, then I don't think we're going to get much further. I know, Ryan, you had worked on supply diversity for years, and they had a great conversation around it with many people. And I don't think that you can comment as whether or not supply diversity is just a natural way we do business now, or do we still have to remind people to do it?
Joe whispered in my ear as well, since GCP houses the Commission on Economic Inclusion, which I co-chair.
Which has an affair tonight.
Yeah, which has an affair right after this. Right. Which UH was recognized for the work that you just talked about. But I do think that we have the tools in this community, much like in some of the other areas, that need to be better utilized and implemented to make this a reality. And the Commission is one of those tools. We also, I was part of the team that delivered to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the Council a document on inclusion to the Transition Committee that talked about how we implement measurables. And I hope that we will, before this plan is complete and adopted, look at where in that plan relative to economic development there are places where we can put measurable steps, outcomes. We have a commission that already has outlined some of the best practices in the country around both hiring, appointments, supplier diversity, and capital formation. So I think the tools are out there. If I could shift for a moment, since I got the mic, I would like to shift to just two other comments. I stated earlier about the plan and the action steps that I really would like us to move as quickly as we can. And I understand because of the newness of this, we have to do a lot of evaluating, we have to do a lot of defining. And I hope we can move to implementing and more implementation in the language of this plan. We're surveying, we're evaluating, we're determining, we're improving, and the language is good language for a planning process. When the planning is done, we need a plan that says we're going to act. And I think in this document, if we can move from that, and I understand it's a living document, I would almost have a time frame by which we'd say we've completed the evaluation process, and here are the action steps in the areas where we need to. And this diversity is one where there's been action steps identified. Let's put them in place. And a totally different subject, and I'll be quiet. In the plan, we talk about transportation, and we talk about designing the county airport so that it's part of a regional strategy. Once again, I think there are plans in place for air strategy in this community, and we've got some challenges with air strategy in this community. And I know there's been questions amongst this group as to whether or not we should even be in the airport business. I think simply saying we're going to design a plan that makes it part of the regional strategy isn't strategic. I think we've got to be more strategic and make an action step about whether we stay in this business or we're not in the business, and if we're in it, what type of business are we in?
Mr. Hall, I completely agree. Actually, that work is underway. We just haven't got anything to say publicly about what our position is, but we're evaluating exactly those questions right now. If I may, I'm hearing a theme about metrics. Back to Joe, about timing, Mayor Jackson, about inclusion. We have an opportunity to shape Ed about the metrics. Okay.
Going back to the earlier inclusion subject, I'd like to broaden that a little bit. I think I raised this at the last meeting. You know, if we're going to look at things like sales tax receipts for metrics, I'm concerned that for this to be the healthy, vibrant county we all want it to be, there needs to be some attention paid to reduction of poverty. And you know, you don't want to put reduction of poverty in as a metric, but you know, I'm concerned that it's important to create a good climate for business, but everybody always says in order to create more jobs. But you know, so often, you know, it doesn't trickle down, if you'll pardon the expression. And I think you know, we have a city that is very, very poor, and quite honestly, I don't think our county can thrive unless we can reduce the urban poverty of the core of the city. And I'd like to see some attention paid in terms of the metrics, in terms of our measuring our success that addresses this issue of reducing poverty. I don't know how you do it, but I'd like to raise that.
A couple of points. In the full plan outlines many, many more metrics, including some of the ones that you're referring. The summary talks about the key ones that we need to look at today. So I understand. But I also say that what I've encountered, looking at the Department of Development, we don't have an economic development department, really. We have a social service entity that spends public money to improve housing and very important aspects of life, to improve the community. But we don't have really the resources to be as effective and transformational as I think is our aspiration. And what we need to do, we must create the capacity to drive the economy. We do not have that capacity today. Other counties do, we do not. That's what we need to do. And without that, there's nothing else. There are no jobs, there is no hope. But we have the opportunity to fix that and address that. And that's why the last action item is reorganizing the Department of Development to make sure that we have the capacity to do the things we're talking about, or at least call the questions, which we don't have that capacity to do today, and we need to do that very quickly.
Can I raise?
Sure.
On the page, you don't have a number, but it talks about aspirations for this Alger County. It says our unique assets are visible, and vibrant, engaging, and sustainable community. our infrastructure is viewed as a regional competitive advantage and is efficient and aligned with economic development goals. Trying to understand what that means. And then you list these things like roads and bridges, water, waste, water collection, stormwater management, air service, that Brian mentioned. So what are you referring to here as aspiration of Cuyahoga County? What do you mean?
I believe the original intent of that, Mayor, was to inventory lots of the things that are here. And one of the challenges I've had with the plan is trying to transition it from an inventory of things we have to, as Mr. Hall said, to what are we going to do about it and with it.
So that's the aspiration. So what is your aspiration? What are you suggesting as an aspiration in regards to these assets?
I'm going to have to find a specific page, Mayor, to be able to answer your
So
specific
page
question.
at least on the draft, it was page.
What they're talking about is saying that we have assets that make us distinctive. We have water, we have bridges, we have things that we can lever and use, and our aspiration is to not be afraid of that, but to say we have good things here.
Right, can I go for, and so when Brian mentioned air service, you said you were currently studying that, and I'm assuming it's based on your county's aspiration. So what is the county's aspiration in regards to air service?
Right, the county has an airfield called Shea, and this conversation only concerns the county's asset, that airport, and it's an asset right now. Interesting enough, it's managed by 14 county employees, and it does attract FAA money, and it's an important employer of people, not the county staff, but the tenants. There's a golf course there. There's some commercial buildings there as well. And there's a master plan that's been put in place to figure out how you lever that asset completely. We have to think, as Joe has said and as Brian has said, we have to think about, what is that business? What's the highest and best use? How do we do it efficiently, effectively? And we're not the only airport in the region, and so we have to address those issues. That's what that refers to.
And then finally, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know what page this is on, but it was talking about the $100 million, and one part it says strategically asset county current allocation of federal community block grant funding require regional cooperation and strategic alignment for flexible funding of local initiative projects considering similar requirements for home. So are you looking at as combining all block grant dollars in the county, or just, I'm trying, what do you mean by that?
I don't think we're, I mean, the county's a recipient of any city. I'm assuming that was only referring to the cities that where we're kind of the repository, right, because they're under 50,000.
Right, there are about 4 communities get their own block grant. The county is a recipient and manages block grant for many communities. It's referring to that consortium of communities.
But the way that's worked, and it's related to the $100 million, because when you talk about, not that we're going to be heavy-handed about it, but when it makes sense that the county is going to spend money, whether it's a federal pass-through, whether it's federal or state pass-through money, or whether it's our own funds that we've gotten out of our budget, that there's some string attached to that. If a city says, well, we want to do everything on our own, and we also want county assistance, we might say no. So I think we haven't gotten at exactly how that would work, but we'd like those dollars to be spent in a way that's consistent with what we're trying to do county-wide. Yeah.
Well, I happen to agree. I think it's a great start. We can, a lot of work to do, but at least it gives us a framework to work from. But there's significant clarity because of what you're thinking may not be what's coming across. So we need to work together.
Agreeing with what Brian was talking about, as far as getting down to the specific metrics that we lay in here, I think we also have to be somewhat careful that this is the first time when you look at the county that we are truly going to wrestle with the issue of, do we have a role in economic development? When you look at the charter, the preamble, it identifies that the voters voted on as the number 2 item after the leadership issue, which we don't want to go off in that direction as far as what happened in the past, but in the preamble and then in item 5 and item 6, it specifically talks about economic development. And we have to remember that the majority of the county budget is going to things like what Harriet is already talking about. What we're talking about is a teeny fraction of the county budget that we're now saying it's time to say that economic development belongs also on the table in addition to all of those other elements, which of course is the primary function of why we drive why we're even having conversations about economic development, so we have the money to be spent on the social programs and platforms. And there's a risk, I think, that if we don't stay on, again, the preamble components, which are jobs, that we will divert ourselves too far away because of the measurements that we need to stay focused on, at least for the short term as we come out of the gate on this first year, 2 years, 3 years of the program.
Can I just add to that? Without directly disagreeing with you, maybe it's an indirect disagreement, it's not just jobs, because we've got too many MIC jobs in our county that pay less than a living wage. I think we should take a qualitative as opposed to a quantitative approach here. I think we need to be worried about the quality of jobs that we're offering. People can have jobs and live in poverty. And so we can employ more people at McDonald's, but I don't think any of us want that. And so I think it isn't jobs, but it's not just jobs, it's what kind of jobs we're creating. And so I do think that the larger issues of poverty that I know the county is set up to address, we wouldn't have to address so many problems of poverty if we didn't have so much poverty. So, I mean, I think that those issues do come into this. I agree with your general point. There's a lot of attention being paid to Health and Human Services already. So we're adding an economic development piece, and that's a good thing. But it is about the quality of jobs. And sort of connected to that, I did have a question on this chart that's also in the short version. I found it interesting, again, along my quality versus quantity theme. It says increase in population. Well, this county already has the 2nd and the 7th largest city in the state in it. Do we really want to measure our growth? Do we need to have an increase in population? We've got plenty of people who don't have jobs living in this county now. If we employed those folks, we'd have a better, we'd increase our quality of life, and we don't need to bring in people to have these jobs because we've got plenty here who need the training. I don't know. I just have a question about, is population increase something that's necessary for our county to aspire to?
I would say, if I can jump, population growth is a measure of vitality and activity, 1. 2, I wish that it were solving our unemployment issue were as simple as matching every person that wanted to work with a job. Unfortunately, our labor force doesn't work that way. We have significant disruption, and we have jobs requiring skills that our workforce doesn't have, and perhaps we can't even train them to have those jobs in the short term. So we're going to need to attract folks from other places with those skills to take those jobs, so those companies can grow and create opportunity for all of our residents. There's an important vector in the plan, which is investing in human capital. That's essential, and that is education. That is workforce development. It's essential. It's equal with quality place. We have to do both of those things. And in my opinion, all the work at Health and Human Services is important, essential, necessary, and not enough. And we have not focused at all, as has been said earlier, on economic development at the county level at all, 0. And we need to fix that so we can take the burden off of our Health and Human Services organizations and put them out of business in the long run.
I just think that I don't think there's an example in the world of a metropolitan area whose economy is growing but their population is shrinking. It just doesn't work like that. But I mean, you have about the population or the unemployment rate here is about, the workforce is about 650, around 600,000, 650,000. The official workforce, there's an underground economy too, but I'm just talking about the official numbers. And the unemployment rate is about 10% or something. So you're talking about 65,000 people officially. There's plenty of people that are underemployed. I'm not counting that. If we lost 65,000 people in the next 5 years, which we will if we don't turn our trends around, it doesn't mean that we'll lose the unemployed folks. What you'll lose people that are mobile and that have economic potential. It's the same argument that's been had, and I hope won in this community about why attract immigrants if immigrants are going to take the jobs that are here. Well, because every study that's ever been done by left wing, right wing, in between foundation will tell you that an immigrant population tends to be eventually a net plus because their entrepreneur rate is higher and they end up being motivated to come here in the first place. So I just don't think that works. Now, why do we have to encourage population in general? It's because otherwise the tax base, I think, is just going to shrink overall. What you have to have is you have to have an economic system that's actually creating wealth and creating opportunities, and then you want to make sure that it's accessible economically to people as much as possible. That's where the social programs come in from, to try to make sure that there's a ladder there for people to get up. I think that it makes sense, though, Harriet, to measure social services indexes in this whole thing. The only thing we have to be, I certainly would want to see if on a macro level what's happening to the unemployment rate after we do what we do. On the other hand, sometimes the better metric is a microeconomic metric, because you're saying if you're going to spend $100 million, what were the job requirements for those funds? And the county has already been pretty careful, and most federal job funding programs, if they're going to put money into a project, you have to be able to see that a job came out of it at the other end. We just have to make sure. I think that there's some of that is appropriate. I think we have to make sure that we don't have so many measurements that we actually end up being almost drowned in data, where it's kind of like the rooster that thought they made the sunrise. We're going to be, $100 million in an economy that's billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's a mistake to say, well, you spent this money, but your unemployment rate is still 10%, and therefore you had. So that's an art, I think, and I think we have to feel our way through that. We're still in an island of a national and an international economy. And if the entire national economy goes downhill, it's not like Cleveland is going to be the exception to that. So there's all kinds of factors at work there. But I think a certain mix of making sure that we have some human impact, that's measured is appropriate. We just have to do it in the right balance. Yeah.
Just a couple comments, Larry. I would agree. I think this is a good starting point. I think you and Dorothy and your staff have done a good job in a tight time frame that's been mandated. As someone, I've got a planning background, and I'm responsible for producing plans, and we have a tendency to look at plans as sort of, well, they can work miracles, and they can't. So I see this as you're really trying to align your resources. You're trying to get intentional about economic development. You're trying to sort of create a whole out of a lot of parts right now, and this is something for you to start organizing your efforts around. And I think this achieves that. We've got a short time frame here, so at some point we gotta cut it off and move on. Anecdotally, I can tell you that in my short time here, the difference from January 1, when the new county government came into existence, and our interaction from the Port Authority has just been remarkable. And so I think it's already really, there's been a shift. I think there's clearly a new DNA here at work, and so I think this is a good start.
Yeah, maybe just one comment. Trying to tie a couple things together. I think, Joe, you were the one that mentioned that some of these metrics are probably best expressed or best manifest itself over a fairly long period of time, 3 to 5 years, and I think that's right. And I think the challenge having the right metrics and then B, a lot of metrics, is you need to be able to tie them back directly to the work here. You need to be able to try to set the metric a priority. So my suggestion would be we should think about whether or not there's something we can do more tactically oriented, over a period of 12 months that are just, that we can directly measure, that may be things related to raising the, or distributing the $100 million fund, or reorganizing how economic development, the organization and the organizational design works. Things that are concrete, things that we can begin to establish the right momentum and success, progress, and then spend the time needed to understanding how that links back to, whether it's job growth or income growth, or those type of things.
Any other questions or comments for this afternoon?
I just wanted to say that I join my colleagues here in saying it's an excellent plan. I don't think I mentioned that.
I want to make, I guess we can wrap it up then. I want to make just a couple quick comments. One is, as people still have the time, because everybody's busy, and I'm sure people are still digesting this plan, we have, we're supposed to submit it to the council on June 1st?
By June 1st.
Is this our final meeting, or do we have more?
5/25.
Okay, I would just ask for people to be as specific as possible. Like, have language ready. If there's something that you want, whether it's a metric or something in a vision statement or a mission statement, just come prepared at that meeting. Everybody has it. And by the way, it doesn't have to wait until the meeting. You can correspond with Larry before that time in terms of specific language, and we'll have options available. And it doesn't mean he'll put it in there, but he'll have it just like you would in a legislative body. Here's an amendment, and we'll talk about it, and we'll get it done. And again, it doesn't mean it's going to be carved in stone, because then it's got to go to council. Actually, council has to adopt it. It doesn't mean there can't be changes. I'm sure that they will make suggestions as well. So I just would ask, it is not perfect as it is, and I would ask that people make specific suggestions at that time. Second thing is that I think we need to think about is that because the mission of what we're doing is so broad and so important, it is impossible in any group like this to be completely representative or inclusive of all the different strands of thought or interest groups or ethnic groups or business groups that are out there in the community, and we shouldn't try to do that. There is, what I think will probably happen as there's more public discussion about it, is that there will be somebody or some folks that feel strongly about a particular issue, and they'll say, this wasn't included there, you don't have a specific plan for X, Y, Z, and you should. And I think we have to resist. As I looked at plans from other counties and other cities, there are cities that you can see, they had a very open process where everybody just kept throwing everything in because they're trying to please 1,000 different points of view. And that may sound good because you sound like you're including people, but you end up with a plan that tries to be all things to all people. So I think we need to be disciplined about it. However, I do think that going forward, we're on a tight deadline. We had to get this done by June 1st. We had to get our members on board. There's a very quick deadline to try to do all those things. I think in our second year, or our existence coming up to the next year, because we'll have to go through this again a year from now, that we should think about ways, either in conjunction with the city government or county government, that we have a process for soliciting of opinions, advice, inclusion of groups that are not specifically represented on this commission. Because that will be, again, I like to try to reverse engineer what might be a failure. There will immediately be people saying, well, the people that were on the committee didn't hear from us, didn't listen to us, didn't include us, we were not heard. And there were ways that we probably could have done that, but because of the constraints of the time and the requirements of the charter, we had to appoint it, convene it, staff it, write it, and submit it at the same time that we were all trying to do everything else that we're trying to do. So that's just something I think we should have an aspiration of in the next year, because I think we heard a little bit of that criticism, not much, but I think there's going to be ways for us to improve on that in our full year of existence after June. Any, yes, sir.
It seems like there's two big areas of consensus already. One would be, everybody seems to think this is going in the right direction. That's good. The second is strong consensus on the value we need for this $100 million fund that you proposed. Even in the next month, between the time, let us know if there's anything we can be doing as a commission to help weigh in on what will be taking place in the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months to help you get that done.
We will.
Because I think it's critical.
We'll do that. We can do that. And by the way, before I forget, I do think, I don't know if it comes out of this body or something else, but you mentioned before that the goals that we end up defining here, to the extent that they're impacted upon federal or state policy. I was in Washington for a couple days a few weeks ago, and we met with the whole congressional delegation for Ohio and some people from the White House and some other folks. The meetings were fine, but it just, the truth of what you said really hits home to me, because I was only representing really county government, and although we certainly got a serious hearing, and Senator Portman was great, and Senator Brown, and so, I mean, it would be so much more powerful if we ended up having specific federal and state asks, yes, or please don't do this to us, or please do this to us. And there's a desire for them to do that, but they're hearing those things in a very fragmented way. And we're still not even doing it, I don't even think, with the state and the new state administration. So Governor Kasich the other day, and I don't even know that we defined to him, even under the limited budget that they have, what really our priorities are when it comes to economic development. We've got to figure out a way to do that better.
It's a great point, because I think the plan is actually silent on advocacy. The plan really considers us as something of an island, well, not an island. It recognizes our interdependence and our competing in the global economy. It doesn't talk about who else can help us, and that's an important aspect that we need to reflect in the next version.
Well, a perfect example of what you're saying is a uniform approach in this county about preserving NASA Glen. Our biggest federal investment connected to innovation that we have. And you're exactly right, we don't have that yet.
But I think the third one that we're coming out of here is direct metrics that are measurable right down to the 12-month period of time. But I think we really need to, I think you heard from Brian, you heard from Joe, and you heard from the mayor. And one that I know that just yesterday we had a long detail at the county council was on the medical mart, and how do we now convert that growing number of companies that have committed. We're now up to 63 that have committed to being in that space. That's a measurable. How do we track those 63 with specific jobs that have come here, some of which are here? How do we go and see, do we have skilled workforce to support those 63? How do we identify whether or not they have been productivity increases? So it is something that is so digestible. It's being watched by everybody. It's going to be a measurement of our success as a county, how this thing takes place. And if we could show those 63, 15%, 20%, whatever our magic is that we trace of those companies, that we grew their jobs, that their sales tax contribution kicked up, that their skilled workforce was ready to go, everything about it, just seems to me it just begs for us to be one of our measurements out there.
Any other questions or comments from members of the commission? Any questions or comments or suggestions from members of the public? Okay.
Do we go to the podium, or do we just ask them to see?
I'm sure we'll hear you wherever you are. Go ahead, Mr. Henley.
My name is Gerald Henley, and I was listening. First of all, I'd like to have had one of the documents, and I'm thankful to be on that list. But a couple of things that were said in terms of the economic development that is taking place now, and the status of the city and the county, cities and the county right now. I really don't, and hopefully that it can get in somewhere. Somehow the same kind of things can't continue to be done and expect a different result. And I'm speaking specifically about things like certain groups and certain people are recognized to do business, and I think that the politics completely overwhelms them. And I think that if we take a look around, And I think you mentioned it, Mr. Fitzgerald, that the population has to grow. And I think that if some other people don't get an opportunity to help grow the population and grow the wealth, I think we end up doing the same kinds of things that we have now. I think that we have, the lady, I don't know what her name was, she mentioned about the two cities, and we have a city here in Cleveland. I mentioned it at the county council meeting the other night. I think that the economic development part has to take place, but I really, really, truly believe and hope and will be looking to see and working to help monitor it and help get some business with it. But the business cannot continue to go to the same groups of people and they don't produce anything other than just another black hole somewhere. You know, a few people may be able to benefit, but when it comes to spreading the wealth, as you said, and spreading it around where a number of people growing jobs, and as the lady said again, providing good jobs and attracting people in, I think it's going to have, the mindset with the commission is going to have to be a little different than what it's been in the past, because you see what we have now. So I'm hopeful that something like that would be available to give new entrepreneurs the opportunity to do things and not go back to the old ones. And I don't want to make it a racial thing, but especially in the African American, the black community, the same people get the contracts over and over and over again, and the black community is decimated. And there's a reflection, it's black people all around the county, but the main concentration in Cleveland is just kind of a deplorable condition. So I would hope that the commission in total wouldn't begin to brand people and begin to exclude people because they may not like how they talk or what they say or what they eat or what television programs they watch, and allow quality work be the measuring stick. And I think I think you mentioned again, Mr. County Executive, Mr. Fitzgerald, that zeroing in on certain little groups and trying to please everybody, and then it end up being something like a half-baked cake. So I would think that the resources, as been mentioned, this county and this city has tremendous resources, but they're being bottlenecked and used over and over and over with the same groups of people, and you're getting the same results, and then when you look around, you have the same deplorable condition. So I hope that.
Well, I understand your point, and there's been times where you could meet a goal because you have an MBE goal, but it was met in a certain way that didn't really disperse the economic benefit of those dollars, and so we got to figure out how to measure that. But like I said, I believe recently in this area it has got. I'm not saying it's as good as it could be. I think it's better than it was, but we've got to figure out what are the best practices to do that. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Hearing none, I will make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.